for this video, I want to kind of go back, if you guys will allow me to take you back. And let's just look at some of the best games, the most popular games that people love, some of the most endeared games. And let's just look at what the performance actually looked like. Because again, we know that some of the industry's, most beloved games originated on console, right? We know that. And we're going to look at some of them and analyze the performance and look at some examples of what games are looking like now on the current gen consoles. And hopefully this puts into perspective what I mean when I talk about why these consoles in this current gen are something to really be celebrated in terms of their performance. So check it out. I'm going to take you back. We're going to look at some games. Obviously, this is just a small snapshot. I'm definitely going to put links into some of the videos and some of the websites that do a great job, by the way, of doing these comparisons. Mad Tech Gaming, shout out to them for sure. But there's others. So appreciate the work there, guys. I'm not claiming ownership of these videos. We're just going to look at them and talk about them. So like I said, put it in perspective here, guys. All right. What do we expect out of a console, period? What do we expect out of these consoles, right? And what have we been used to years ago? No one was talking about pixel counts and everything when they were just playing their N64 and enjoying, those Super Mario 64 and GoldenEye, let's say, or playing GTA 3 for the first time in Vice City on the PS2, right? Playing Oblivion for the first time on the 360 or whatever. Like, these are some of the best reviewed, biggest games of all time. No one was sitting there talking about, wow, when? Did anyone realize that the Oblivion port, ran at sub HD, right? Or dropped this amount of frames or whatever? It wasn't about that. And nowadays, it's all about that, right? But let's just see. Let's look at this look like. Let's just go back. I'm going to start with one of your favorites in mind that's actually about to get a remake very, very soon here in the next few weeks. You guessed it. Yes, this is Tomb Raider on the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn at the time. And we know that the PlayStation was definitely better at handling 3D games at the time. But, this is still useful because the Saturn was a viable system that people had and, was a major player at the time. So, we're going to definitely see the Saturn drop a lot more frames, but the PlayStation dropped frames too. You saw the PlayStation just drop to 20 just from this single combat engagement here with these wolves or dogs or whatever. The Saturn is literally in the teens, right? I mean, and again, at the time, this was considered a technical marvel, especially on the PlayStation. The Saturn was definitely noted to be weaker and not quite as good and not quite as polished, but it still was considered, amazing. And why was it amazing? 3D graphics at the time. Like, to have a 3D world like this that can be navigated, this was a major deal at the time. I get it. We get it, right? My point is that, no one said this is great and novel and, oh my gosh, look at how we traverse a 3D world. But look at how muddy the textures look there. Look how big the performance drops are here. Saturn just literally dropped to 11 FPS and 12 FPS. PlayStation dropped to 20. No one was talking about it like that, right? We're just enjoying the game. But this is what it looked like, guys. Let's look at another favorite of the day. One of my favorites at the time, too. This was like one of the best reviewed games at the time. Tony Hawk Pro Skater on the PlayStation, the original one. And, let's look at that performance graph. How are we looking? You can see it. Obviously, it's a game that generally would target 30. It's generally running in the 20s. That line is not straight. It's not stable by any stretch. Again, this is not even like one of the bigger. This is the first level in the game. It's one of the most enclosed and kind of smaller levels, actually, of the game. So, not about that. Yeah, it's hitting above 30, which implies that the frame rate is actually unlocked. But we're not seeing anything near 60. We're not seeing anything near 40. Never mind 60. Here we are, one of the outdoor maps, and yeah, we saw the frame rate was dropped down to 20, 21, easily there. It's in the low 20s, hovering around 25. This was what this game felt like at the time. Again, what I remember was just all of the rave about how fun the game was, how cool it was to be skateboarding in this 3D environment, blah, blah, blah. No one said Next Generation Magazine, GamePro, EGM at the time wasn't like, oh, well, It's a cool game, but gosh, is the frame rate slow. You gotta, if they could only keep their frame rate at 30 or push the game frame rate to 60, it would actually be playable and we can enjoy it. No, that was not the discussion, guys. Let's move to the N64 now. Again, super popular system at the time that we enjoyed with our friends, 4-player co-op. Mario Kart 64, it's still a classic. I still will play this game right now today as is. It was awesome, super fun. What did it actually feel like though? And if you recall, the N64 at the time, relative to the PlayStation and just what we were used to, like it felt super smooth. Games like Wave Race, I remember 64 at the launch. This game, Mario Kart, it felt smooth, right? But we look at the chart here. We saw when the match first started, when it was more players, we were well in the 20s, right? It actually does a decent job holding 30 though, for the most part, as you see. But if we check out a different map, one of my favorites, again, we get a little bit of traffic going on, and yeah, we seeing frame rates drop now, right? Into the mid 20s, definitely with some of the cars and traffic. Obviously, when there's more characters on the screen, we'll definitely see more drops there. But it's mostly 30, it's mostly 30, right? But yeah, let's look at another map real quick. The jungle map, and yeah, this one is a little bit more treacherous, right? Frame rate is struggling. We're not even hitting 30 for the most part as we go through the whole thing. We have water in this map, right? We got more jungle setting. We hit 30, but yeah, it's generally staying in the mid 20s, right? 25-ish. So, I mean, we see it. Definitely not a stable 30. Drops down to close to 20, and mid 20s is kind of like the average, right? I mean, that was fine. That was more than fine and more than enjoyable. And by the way, guys, remember this game, like many N64 games, supported 4-player split screen. So if we're dropping to, as you can see here, 21 FPS on the single player, I don't have the data to show you guys, but just think about what the frame rate would actually look like on the 4-player split screen mode. Good God. Food for thought. All right, this is one. And this is kind of sad though, but everyone has so many fond memories of GoldenEye. What you probably don't remember is how the performance in the game actually was. And this is the single player. Again, the 4-player split screen is going to be way worse. But guys, this is the single player of GoldenEye 007 on the N64. And yes, you're seeing that right. The frame rate is generally averaging in the mid-teens. The mid-teens. Look at this. Even when there aren't enemies on the screen really shooting at you like that, struggling to hit 20. Struggling to hit 20. Yeah, again, early days, right? Early days of 3D, it was just so novel to have a first-person shooter on the console that worked, right? All right. I mean, there was Doom and Wolfenstein and stuff like that on PC, but consoles ports generally were pretty bad. This was one of the first FPS where the industry said, wow, it can work on console. And it's like, looking back, could it work on console? God knows. If a console today tried to release any game with any kind of tech, if PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series said, hey, look at what we can do path tracing, and they showed a path tracing game that ran at 15 FPS like this, it wouldn't even be a thought to release it, right? It would be considered completely unplayable. And I'm just showing you guys here that, again, at that time, when we heard N64 and Nintendo talking about silicon graphics technology, right, and Project Reality, and it was this cool, crazy thing. Well, what was it? It was a cool, crazy thing, but look at how it ran. But no one cared, right? Because we just focused on the game, and we still could appreciate the tech and the novelty of what it was doing. But yes, 20 FPS was fine. Perfectly fine back then. It's amazing. All right. Let's take another quick look at, obviously, an all-time classic on the PlayStation 1, the very first Gran Turismo game. Now, the first thing you may notice is that the frame rate actually only targets 30. Again, early days, right? Now, here's the first-person view. Looks like this is Trial Mountain, I believe. And yeah, it's not quite hitting that 30, yeah. It's fairly close. But we see it now, yeah, dipping into the mid-20s. Definitely not staying at 30. Again, early days of 3D. This was still one of the most realistic looking racing games of the day. Most racing games at the time, would have struggled to hit 30, of course, But I'm just pointing out again, no, I don't remember ever reading or hearing about any kind of frame rate analysis of this game at the time. But again, by today's standards, again, people will be crucifying this game, of course. Any game, not just that is Gran Turismo. Any racing game that looks like this, first of all, that only runs at 30 target. Secondly, that doesn't even hit that, as you can see. It doesn't even hit that target. But not the worst example, but yeah, still close to 30. But yeah, definitely not anything but consistent, right? Let's keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to PlayStation 2 now, shall we? Some great examples. And here's, of course, an all-time classic, Shadow of the Colossus. And I'm pointing this game out because, yeah, this was one of the highest reviewed and highest regarded games when it came out. And yeah, I mean, we can see the stats here immediately. Now, this is kind of a cutscene. So even here, it's a real-time cutscene, but it's a cutscene. It's running at 20. You saw it. Obviously, the game, the max is trying to target is only 30. Yeah. We see the men is 15 right now. Pretty much 15 even through this. This is not interactive. Like, I mean, I'm just like, this isn't even about playing. This is like just sitting there watching it, and it's running at, 15 to 20 FPS. Now, you get off the horse, and once it becomes interactive, I mean, this whole scene is still locked to 20. All right, so we jumped to some gameplay, doing some traversal. We're closer to 30. Closer to 30. It's dropping. So obviously, game is just, has some optimization issues. It's trying to target 30. You can see it hitting 20 even, so it's clearly something going on there. Now we're actually getting to fighting one of the Colossi. Again, the cutscenes are all running at 20 and below, dropping even below that. Now, here we go, running towards the Colossi. Again, the actual gameplay, as we see, is also still fixed at 20. Or generally running at 20. I mean, for the most part, when you played this game back in the day on the PS2, you were playing this game at 20. Somewhere between 15 to 20 for the most part. It hit 30 in rare instances. Now, as you start climbing on the Colossi and everything ramps up, what do we see? 15. I mean, like, it's flat. It's staying at 15. We played this game back in the day at 15 FPS with a 30 FPS target. We did. You did. Nowadays would absolutely be considered completely unacceptable, right? Everyone want to scream how 30 frames per second is unacceptable. So this would not even be allowed. This would be banned. All right. You knew it was coming. All-time great. Grand Theft Auto 3. Absolutely seminal game at the time. Fully realized 3D world where you could just have the freedom to do what you wanted to do, right? Novel. PS2 was a beast. It was, to even realize this. But again, by today's standards, what did this look like? 20. We're in the low 20s, literally at 20. Below 20, we saw some 19 there. And of course, again, the city wasn't even, I mean, look how sparse the city is actually populated here, right? But yeah, we nominally are running at 20 as we drive around here. They're not showing an average, but if they were, average would be pretty much in the low 20s, the average. Some rare instances of where it's hitting 30. Now, of course, we get to a cutscene. It's going to hit 30 there, which is good, unlike Shadow of the Colossus. I get back into some gameplay. Let's do a little destruction on the street. And what happens? I mean, yeah, obviously the frame rate is going to tank. Down in the mid 20s, low 20s. Now, when the chaos stops, it does hit 30, which again, it's a pretty good accomplishment for the day to even be hitting 30 this much. But of course, the frame rate was anything but stable. Look at this. About to hit in the low 20s here. Now the cops are coming. Another seminal PS2 game. I know what you guys are thinking. This was already kind of talked about at the time as being a poor performing game, but I thought it'd be interesting to revisit it kind of with a different lens. I love the Killzone series. Obviously, this one, the first one, wasn't really like the best example, of course, but it showed potential. By the time we get to Killzone 2 on the PS3, I mean, that was just awesome game. So I played them all, even through Shadowfall, which I actually enjoyed. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it hit 30. Like it didn't hit 30 at all. But as we see, in some typical combat here, a lot of fog, a lot of obscure geometry, but we're dropping easily just down to 20. We're basically between 20 and 30. Averages would definitely be in the low to mid 20s here. Again, not going to get a stable frame rate, not going to get a smooth experience at all. That was not the case here. Even when some of the action stops, you see here, we're still in the mid to low 20s. All right, one of my favorites. I want to take a quick look at Call of Duty 2. Now, this was the launch title on the 360. And I was there at launch on the 360. This was one of my favorite games at the time. And yeah, I mean, it's Call of Duty, right? So this was around the time where Call of Duty was really establishing itself, that fast, twitch, smooth gameplay that we know and love. But you see what happens here, guys. Do you remember this? I remember playing this at launch and talking about the HD graphics and how clear and clean and smooth everything felt. Again, I didn't see any frame rate analysis and I didn't care. I didn't feel it myself. But this is what it was. Look at this. This frame rate is all over the place. It is targeting 60, of course. It's really running at everything between 30 and 60. And obviously with the heavy combat, is pretty, like, look, it's almost locked at 30 when the combat really kicks in. Now, when things slow down, it goes back up to 60, right? Now, this would have been pretty typical of what you would have expected from a console, right? Like, it targets 60, it hit 60 in the best cases. When things got heavy, it's going to drop, right? But you wouldn't necessarily want it to drop half the frame rate, of course. It go back down to 30. Drop might be 50 something, right? So yeah, things are looking smoother now, and this is what, you did get the feel of 60 for sure. But yeah, let some action come. And yeah, that frame spike dips as well, It just drops all over the place. Which again is gonna just feel so, disjointed. But I love this game. I really did. I played through this campaign probably 3 or 4 times. And I enjoyed it on the 360 at the time. But I'm just, again, by today's standards, people will be ripping this up. We're talking about how weak 360 is and how horrible of a port it is, and the PC could do so much better. And, yeah, we get it. All right, here's another, of course, all-time favorite, all-time classic. This is Halo, the original Halo on the Xbox. And the Xbox was a beast at the time, of course. Definitely had much better image quality, much better performance than PS2 and GameCube of the day. What I'm highlighting here, though, is that, this was a pretty good, well-performing game. You see, it's mostly 30, but you do see these drops, right? And again, by today's standards, Digital Foundry, for example, will be ripping into how inconsistent the performance is and how those frame time spikes kill the experience and blah, blah, blah. Now, again, the frame rate here wasn't locked at 30. You see it actually go up above 30 at times. But it's mostly 30, but it does have those drops. So as you go through, you see here, look at this. That's kind of a inconsistent frame time there. Here's a big drop drop to 20, 22. So again, it was real. Right. Again, these are the most played games, right, that we played in the previous generation. I'm not just throwing random games to find just poor use cases. I'm picking some of the best games that I know, we played back in that generation. It's great though. This is mostly consistent performance for Halo, but yeah, definitely has some drops. All right, here's a more recent example, something that I was very familiar with: Battlefield 4 at launch on the PS4 and Xbox One. And here's a side-by-side that was done. And it really does hit 60 most of the time, but yeah. Now, this is kind of one of those like cinematic set pieces here. Frame rate obviously drops for to handle this explosion. It gets back up to 60 for the most part, but again, my point here, this felt great. I remember this, right? I mean, it was rare on console to have a game that looked and felt as close to the PC as this game did. But what I'm pointing out here is that, again, the performance was anything but consistent. And this is in the single player. The multiplayer was even worse. The multiplayer would drop frames all the time. Right? But even here on the single player, we see a lot of frame drops. And by the way, the PS4 drop seemed to drop more because it was running at a higher resolution. This is one of those games that was limited to 720p on the Xbox One. This is, cutscene stuff here. Again, some more action, some more gameplay, fast moving in the car. Pretty good, right? I mean, keeping 60 for the most part. So we see the improvement over time, right? I mean, this is running better than what we saw for like Call of Duty 2 and the Xbox 360 and obviously the really old stuff. That's what I'm showing. But again, it wasn't like completely consistent. So I'm saying we get frame time spikes, we get FPS drops. That affects the feel, right? How smooth it feels when you see those kind of little dips right there. Again, another scene. I remember this thing taking me back though. This was it was a great experience to play this game on the console like this at launch. I mean, I had it on the PC too, but I remember thinking it looked pretty close to the PC version. And yeah, see, each system has these moments where they struggle, and you do get some dips. And again, multiplayer was definitely worse, but this isn't horrible, but again, overall pretty good. So I showed those old titles, guys, to lay out the lane. There's a lot of titles, some of which I couldn't find, videos for, data for. We'd be here all day. I could have showed a lot of stuff. PS4, Xbox One, more games there. More PS3 games, of course, and Xbox 360 games, et cetera, et cetera. But you get the idea. What I was pointing out is that, again, some of the biggest games that we played of the day, we enjoyed them, and the performance was not stellar and was not consistent, is the key thing I want to point out here. But let's look at now some current generation games. And yes, I'm showing, latest version. Nowadays, we get patches and stuff like that. So let's start with an obvious one that was still is a pretty bad performer actually on PC. Here's Jedi Survivor. This is with the latest patch, that performance patch that fixed a lot of stuff. So this is the performance mode, which targets 60. So what we're seeing here is what it looked like at launch. It had a performance mode. People complained about it. Again, a lot of talk about how quote unquote weak the systems are and how you're not going to see consistent performance modes, and it's going to be back to having to run at the fidelity 30 hertz mode to get stable performance, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, right? I mean, again, it had nothing to do with the system. It had everything to do with the developer and software and what they had time to do. They went back, patched it, and on the right, you see the patch version. It's a lot more consistent. It's a actual true 60 hertz mode. It doesn't drop very often. It does drop sometime. It does drop, but not that much. And again, look at the game, right? I mean, look at how amazing the game is. Now, again, they're pointing out how much better it runs post-patch. And this is an important message that, again, we've seen that. We've seen games come out at release, like a Plague Tale Requiem. At launch, it was limited to 30. People talked about it then. Oh, this is going to be the rise of 30. It's like, no. For the most part, if any developer can take a 30 hertz game and make a 60 hertz game, if they really wanted to, if that's what the priority for them, right? They got to make some concessions. They got to make some optimizations, but they can do it if they really wanted to. Figure out what where you're bound, where you're limited, CPU, GPU. Make some adjustments to the engine and to the code, and you can get it going there, right? So again, this discussion about like people say stuff like that, just ridiculous stuff like, oh, said console can't do 60 hertz. Like, that's ridiculous. Of course, the console can do it, right? It's just a matter of software. And that's what you see with a lot of these patched games, get it. This is the same system. The performance was there at launch. They just didn't have time to exploit it. But yeah, as we see here, this game runs pretty damn consistently at 60 hertz now. On both the Series X and PS5, while still looking amazing. All right, and you know I had to include this one, Spider-Man 2 PS5. I'm just showing the performance mode, the regular performance mode. They have the VR unlocked modes, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, you're swinging through this full city. You see a segment here. I mean, this line is flat, right? You see the different examples I've shown you guys. Like, I mean, this is a full-on AAA flagship title from Sony. It has full ray tracing, ray trace reflection throughout the entire world. All the cars, the ground, puddles, rain, buildings, windows, etc. And the frame rate is absolutely locked, even on the 30 frame per second mode. It's locked. All right, here's your favorite game in mine. Here's Alan Wake 2. This is running on the Xbox Series X. Admittedly, the Xbox Series X does have more stable performance than the PS5 in most cases. PS5 is not that far behind, but it is more stable here. So the output is 1440p. They're using like a reconstruction with FSR. That's what they're showing from 850p performance mode. That's software. That's developers making choices. The end result, though, is that one of the best looking games released to date and the best looking games of this generation so far is running with the absolute flat line at 60. Again, it does drop frames sometime. It might not show in this particular snippet, but again, the general experience looks like this on console. And you can still see the quality of the visuals. Yes, it's lower resolution in this case on performance mode for sure. It's more blurry and such, but this is the console running at a locked 60 FPS. For those that, prioritize performance, prioritize frame rate, here you go. And again, it's not just throwing in some 60 hertz mode just to say you did it. It is a consistent performer. Even here with this action, look at this, right? The enemy comes out, right? You got extra particle effects, you got extra pulse effects, combat going on. The frame rate did not drop a single frame. It did not waver at all. I mean, it really is amazing. And mind you, the developer Remedy admitted that they didn't even have that much time trying to optimize this. They kind of did it later, where they said, okay, let's try to see we can do a performance mode to see what we get. And this is what they got. It's really amazing. Okay, finally, let's look at the other big gun for 2023, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Now again, this game has a fidelity mode and a performance mode, and both modes have ray tracing enabled. And super dense jungles and foliage, you see what's going on here. The blurriness, by the way, is mostly the video capture here. It's not super high resolution, sorry about that. But I really just wanted to show you the frame rate graph. You get the idea. And yeah, again, this game does drop frames here and there. You've seen them. Here's one. Again, it literally dropped one frame to 59, right? There it dropped to 57. You saw that. So it dropped a few frames there. Look at how dense the environment is. Look at the lighting. Just how much geometry is involved in rendering a scene like this. And it's still pretty stable though. I mean, in fact, it's probably more stable than what you would get on most PCs. Even PCs that are more powerful than this. This is the PS5 version here, but there's a lot more variability on PCs and PC systems, obviously, than the console in general. So you're more inclined to see just, more drops, more frame rate spikes. And also frame rates are usually left unlocked on PC, right? So you are going to see more variability. Here, the target is 60. They're trying to lock to 60. Again, there are frame rate drops. It's typically single digits, handful, right? Maybe down to 55, 56, 57. Here, they're taking to the air. So, I mean, again, the scope and scale, they got combat going on. There's fire, there's missiles firing, there's smoke and particle effects. And yeah, I mean, the frame rate is dropping. Here we go. Let's see. But what are we dropping to? 58, 57. 59. We saw what some of the other stuff was, right? I mean, stuff was dropping from 60 to 30, right? In some cases below 30, hovering in the 20s, just fluctuating all over the place. I mean, the line here is still mostly flat. And this is clearly, easily considered one of the best graphical games that we have seen to date. To date. I mean, you look at the sheer scale and the density of what they're doing here, with ray tracing enabled, by the way, still in the performance mode. It's a pretty good performing 60. Look at this. Okay, here were some drops, probably from that waterfall over there. What does it drop to again? 59.1. Right? I mean, again, you can live with that. You're not going to feel that a whole lot. The overall average frame rate here is probably around 58, 59 on average. I mean, come on. This is still considered a great performance. So there you have it, guys. 2 parts. What am I trying to say there? Right? We looked at the videos. I showed some examples of old games on consoles versus some recent big tier games. I mean, right? Where's the lie? I didn't, just pull some backwards compatibility game or some really lightweight title. I mean, Avatar, Alan Wake, Spider-Man, right? I mean, and hopefully you can see what I'm trying to convey here. The performance on these big AAA titles for these current gen, in several cases featuring ray tracing, even targeting their 60 FPS, not just the fidelity mode, is pretty damn good, man. That line in the FPS graph is largely flat. And it doesn't take a whole lot of gameplay. It doesn't take a whole lot of different scenes in a lot of the older games to see, just how bad the performance could be at spots, right? Now, again, I'm not saying that they're all necessarily apples to apples comparisons in different ways, stuff like that. My point, though, is that these are all, right? Some of the best games, some of the best reviewed games, some of the best selling games, some of the all-time, just legendary games that people have enjoyed. And once upon a time, people enjoyed those games and they raved about them and they raved about the platform they were running on, whatever, despite the fact that they looked blurry at times, they ran at sub HD resolution, or the frame rate was inconsistent, right? It still was enjoyable. You still were able to get a feel for the game. So part of what I was trying to show is just think about that. Like I said, to me, it's honestly embarrassing just how hard to please gamers are, the gaming community at large. It's ridiculous, honestly. And a lot of it, though, is just how we have recalibrated our expectations, right? Because 20 years ago, we didn't expect Halo to be perfect. We didn't expect Call of Duty 2 to be perfect. We didn't expect Motorstorm to be perfect on the PS3. We didn't expect Heavenly Sword to be perfect on the PS3. We didn't expect Grand Theft Auto 3 or Vice City or San Andreas to be perfect on the PS2. For us to enjoy them, for us to say we're going to spend our money on them. Even though, of course, all of those games were ported, not all those games, but the GTA games were ported to PC and Xbox and everything else. But the expectation wasn't there. We just enjoyed the game. That's my message. We're not enjoying the game. There's literally people saying, well, they're not going to buy Dragon's Dogma 2 because it said that it only will have a 30 frames per second mode. Despite the fact that 30 frames per second mode will probably be like locked solid, on console. But just, and it's like it'll be like one of less than 10 games in the entire library that are limited to 30 frames per second. But I can't play that. Not buying it. Nope. Can't play it. These damn consoles is just horrible. They're weak. They're like, that's what people literally, no, I'm not, this is what people are saying right now. The kind of stuff that I hear. And it's just like, dude, come on now. What more do you want? That was my theme for part 1. And for part 2, it's like, this is the best it's ever been. That's the story here. This is the best it's ever been for consoles. Just look back. I gave you some examples. You know, again, not to say that every game had horrible performance. No, there were plenty of games, of course, that still had stable 30s, stable 60s, whatever. Dreamcast, one of my favorite all-time systems. Most of their games ran at 60, arcade ports and stuff. And like games like Soul Calibur, silky smooth, perfect 60 almost. Pretty, you know, like there were some of those examples. But again, I'm just saying, some of the biggest and best games that we have played to date. You saw the games I picked, going back to PS1, right? Had, but by today's standards, I mean, in many cases, would not have even been allowed to be released. These games would have been like boycotted and banned before they even released. We talked about, you know, how horrible some of the releases have been in the past year or two, especially on PC. And in many cases, they still weren't as bad as some of the stuff that I showed that we played, you know, in the past. That's what I'm saying here, guys. You know, just think about this. Get it together. You know, we have never had it this good. The performance of these systems are as best as they could be, and they delivered on what they said they would deliver on. They brought us up a notch across the board, you know. And yes, they are fixed hardware, so they are not getting any better than what they were in 2020. That's the nature of consoles. But for a console generation, we've never had it this good. That's my message. What do you think, though? Am I completely off base? I'm sure, you know, some of you guys probably still think that. But, I mean, where's the lie? Tell me, where am I lying here? I'm throwing out information. I'm throwing out facts. This isn't just my personal feelings or personal opinion in terms of what I'm presenting. Like I said, the numbers don't lie. We're hitting 60 FPS way more than we have ever had. And not just 60, but, again, a stable 60, a more consistent 60. But by and large, clearly, the software is speaking for itself. It's showing that these boxes are not underpowered. We've never had it this good. And you guys, some of you guys need to check yourselves and just think. Stop complaining about everything. Enjoy the games. Just enjoy them. That's all for now. That's all for this series. True Techno Gamer. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment. Let's talk about it. Till next one. Signing off.